Hi, the gathering. I think we've done as much as anyone tracking and delving into South African politics and what's happening on social media. And when we were given time to speak about it today at the Maverick gathering, there were three things that I wanted to impart upon you. The first thing was South African conversations online are just a hive of manipulation. But that's the case all through Africa. That's the case in Europe. That's the case everywhere we look. But we're no exception. It's very difficult to take any of these things at face value these days. The second thing is the product that they sell is easy answers to complex questions. Certainty in the face of an ever uncertain world. And the purveyors of that product are a mixture of grifters and cynical populist politicians. The analogy that I like to think of when thinking about social media is a starling murmuration, which is like a flock of thousands of birds flying in unison in a cloud. And that's kind of like what we are when we're on social media. We are one of those starlings in that flock. And the patterns look mesmerizing, but they're actually being shaped by outside forces. And also the outside roles of individual starlings in that flock directing the shape of the flock as a whole. So it's a good analogy for what we do. And sorry, I've got the wrong slides. So it's, I lost my train of thought now. So you've got these, the starling flocks, and you have these behaviors, and there's three things that are shaping our behaviors. The first thing that's shaping our behaviors are obviously the algorithms of the platforms. So what gets served up to you in your stream. The second thing is just the incentive of being a person on social media, influencer or otherwise. The incentive is that you want to create engagement, and you put stuff out there and you get feedback about what creates engagement. And so we're not always trying to put stuff out there that's just the best and the most true stuff. We're putting stuff out there, and the influencers we follow are putting stuff out there that gets them engagement. And the third thing that's shaping our behavior is covert influence. Paid influencers who work under the cover in a gray or black market that work to shape our perceptions in ways that we don't even realize is happening. And what I want to talk about today is that third group primarily. The first concept I want to introduce you to is the concept of buzzers. It's a kind of social media user. There's a lot of talk about bots, but bots aren't really a thing. Platforms are really good at spotting bots. What is more of a thing are users who just behave in a really low-quality way. They produce low-quality social signals. But let's have a look at what a regular user looks like on social media. So that blue dot is a person on social media, and those links are them interacting with people. And you and I, we interact with people like us. People with a few followers, people with many followers, celebrities. We repost them, we like them, we retweet them, we mention them, we interact with them in a diversity of ways and with a diversity of people. The way in which influence occurs on social media is through what are called buzzers. And buzzers are real people, and if you call them a bot, they'll quickly say, oh, you're wrong, I'm not a bot, I'm a real person. But they have a really perverse incentive to act. And what they do is they single-mindedly interact with key influencers. So they might have real interactions with, like you and I do, but they spend an inordinate amount of time interacting with influencers. And there's a few reasons why they might do that. You could be an activist. Maybe you just really care about a topic. Tigray, Palestine, rural safety is a big one in South African context, a lot of buzz is there. Maybe you're radicalized. Maybe you found yourself in a dark corner of the internet, and early in the morning there was mention of the manosphere, for example. Maybe you are in a more extreme political movement. You could have found yourself into those kind of corners. You're radicalized. You are very fastidious about pushing a message. Or someone's paid you to do it. Someone has said to you, I want a hashtag to trend, I want to rehabilitate the image of a politician, I want xenophobia to be a wedge issue in the upcoming elections, and they pay you to promote that as a buzzer. So a lot of what we can look at now is where the buzzers in South Africa, because that gives us some insight into where we're being played. But what I'm going to show you is not who's paid for campaigns. What I'm going to show you is where there's dodgy behavior happening. From this data alone, we can't know who the money is behind a campaign, but we can say who's benefited from it. But past that, that gets back to the realm of journalists. Also, what I'm going to show you is all Twitter, or X. We see it on other platforms as well, Facebook, TikTok, places like that. But the reality is that X is still the public sphere in South Africa and around the world. Even if you're not part of it, it's still the main place where conversations are thrashed out in public, and it has an outsized effect of spilling back over into the broader conversation. One more thing I want to show you before, or talk to you about, or introduce you to before we go into some examples. This is some work that we did with Tabelo Timzi, a journalist, and funded by the Henry Naumann Foundation, where we actually went and investigated the undercover black market for influence. It's just like regular influencers. It's just like a brand going and saying, promote my brand. But the difference is that they don't say that they've been paid. And they use swarms of influencers, small little influencers, nano influencers or buzzers, to promote their content in an inauthentic way. So how it works is, I'm a client. If I'm going through the legit approach, I'm going through a marketing agency or PR agency, and most of them are legit. Some of them, however, might put you in contact with some kind of influence broker. Or if I'm some kind of cynical populist politician, I probably have that influence broker on speed dial. And normally that influence broker is what we call a mega influencer. A mega influencer, there are many of them in South Africa. You'll know them, they're anonymous, they're really prominent, they have a hot take on every subject, from reality TV stars through to DJs, sport, and politics. Because what they're actually doing is they are trying to drive engagement on hot topics with their hot takes. They're trying to grow their networks all the time of followers so that they can weaponize those networks and rent them out to the highest bidder. And one day they work for a reality TV star, and the next day they work for a foreign nation state. So we have influence brokers, probably a mega influencer, probably in the same WhatsApp group with a bunch of other mega influencers. A brief gets dropped into that WhatsApp group. They put up their hands, I'm going to take that brief, and in our interviews with them, they don't even read it half the time. And they then cascade it down into another WhatsApp group filled with their nano influencers or buzzers. And those nano influencers then have to do something like comment on a post, comment negatively on a competitor, praise me, get a hashtag trending by everyone using it at the same time early in the morning, like something to make it look more popular than it is. Those are the kind of things that they have to do. They take a screenshot of it, put it back into the WhatsApp group, and they get paid between 10 and 200 Rand in mobile money, mobile data, over-the-top OTT vouchers, which they can use for groceries. Because a lot of these nano-influencers, when we speak to them, they're unemployed. They have to go to a McDonald's or they have to go to a shopping center to get data so that they can actually complete the task. And then along comes us, the regular users, the commentators, the journalists, the unwitting politicians, and we pick up those talking points as a kind of groundswell, not realizing that it's been inauthentically created, and we legitimize it, and we enter it into our broader discourse. Here's an example of the top 20 most influential accounts talking about our elections last year. 5 of them were anonymous political influencers. Some of them definitely sell their services. Some of them likely use those services, and all of them have a perverse incentive to skew our discussions by creating sensational, hot take, partisan content that skews our political debates. This is an example of a campaign, 2 campaigns. This is a great example because it's actually 2 campaigns run by the same network, and the second campaign had 2 different networks working on it. And it's around the hashtag Mashatile Itemba Letu, or Mashatile I Hope, a Paul Mashatile puff piece. And the second one was around budget for the people, which I think was the ANC budget vote, or the ANC budget debate at the time. And every one of those dots is a social media influencer. The size of them is how influential they are. But the important thing to note is that people using those hashtags clustered very tightly together. They were all interacting and repeating and reposting each other. And that's what I'm showing you. And if you look at where the buzzers are, they're all in that community. That's buzzer behavior right there, or those people amplifying each other to get a message out. And if you look at what they're saying, which you can't read, and I'm going to try to read for you, I respect Paul Mashatile. Comrade Mashatile is our beacon of hope. Mashatile is shaping the future of South Africa and the continent. That's the kind of message that hashtag is trying to get out there. If we go to this other cluster promoting the budget for the people hashtag, they're using a slightly different approach. This is giveaway page essay. They're saying stand a chance to win an OTT voucher, repost, like, comment. So they're actually kind of doing it out in the open. But if we look at the kind of content that comes out of it using the hashtags, again, you can't read it. But what you'll see, it's the same picture being used. It's very clean, dry written, and we've spoken to influencers, and they say they used AI to say the same thing in different ways. And that seems to be what's happening here. Someone's being given assets to use and messages to promote. Here's an example from last week, a kind of reputation laundering campaign against, seemingly for Tebogo Malaka after the Daily Maverick sting. Again, we don't know who paid for it, we just know who benefited from it. And this is a case where the account Haze Africa is asking users to they're trying to get this hashtag trending, Tebogo Malaka uncensored, and the second hashtag, Tebogo versus the system, where Haze Africa actually forgot to include the hashtag. And we see that most of the users that are sharing this are showing buzzer behavior. And when we look again at the kind of content coming out, it's very well written. They've even forgot the hashtag, just like the hashtag symbol, just like Haze Africa asked, and they're using the exact same pictures. It's going to the SAPS scandal, which is obviously so prominent at the moment. This is discussions around Senzo Mqunu from January till recently. Lots of them. And what stands out for me is this community at the bottom, this highly interconnected community of users that sits separate from the rest of the conversation. And lo and behold, when you look where's buzzer behaving happening, it's in this community. They sit separate because they're all trying to amplify themselves and their content to try and create a trend. And if you look at what they're saying, it's actually pretty tame compared to the kind of more sycophantic content we saw with the Mashatile campaign. It's promoting the accomplishments of Mqunu and the ANC and SAPS. In any other scenario, it would just be considered pretty regular marketing, but the difference is that they're using swarms of anonymous accounts and they are not indicating that it's a paid campaign. And Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, also very top of the mind, the flip side of the SAPS scandal at the moment. We still haven't figured what's going on here exactly, but a cursory look at mentions of Mkhwanazi shows that up until before his press conference, there'd already been 600,000 mentions of him, which is a lot by South African standards. We just don't see that level normally. And since his press conference, there's been almost 2 million mentions, which is like what you see around election time. You know, it's a lot. It's unprecedented. So that's one to watch. But the point is, there's the battles that happen on the ground, in our courts, also happen online. And it's these swarms, it's these dueling swarms of users that are kind of running the battle. Last example, white genocide, because I think this one's probably more relevant to a lot of the people in this audience. This was conversations leading up to President Ramaphosa's visit to the White House, conversations that came out of the farm murders community through Elon Musk up to Donald Trump, culminating in the White House visit, and hundreds of thousands of mentions of white genocide. But there's three main points to this conversation. There's the majority of the use of white genocide was amongst what we call the magosphere. It was a domestic conversation meant for conservative Americans, anchored by Elon Musk, End Wokeness, Laura Loomer, accounts like that. It wasn't a conversation about South Africa for South Africa. It was actually a conversation for conservative MAGA supporters. On the opposite end of South Africa, we had progressive, liberal South Africans disputing the conspiracy. And in between connecting them, we had this bridge community, which was like the Plaasmoord farm murders, farm attacks community, who don't always use white genocide. In fact, very few of them do use white genocide. They mostly are activists trying to bring attention to their specific issue. But their content, and some of them in that community, was catered towards the MAGA crowd and was appropriated by the MAGA crowd and transmuted into this concept of white genocide. And when you look at where the buzzers are, I've never seen a picture like this in any other data set I've measured, how they clustered around Elon Musk and into the MAGA universe and reached down into that farm attacks community and pulled out the kind of white genocide narrative. And all that red, and it just shows, it's to some degrees not reality what's happening there. And white genocide generally, it's not really about South Africa. It's a rhetoric tool for a domestic American audience. But all that red can obscure what is happening in the local context. And so if you just zoom in on the white, progressive, and liberals, not just white, but progressive, or the whole white body politic except for the farm murders are in there. Progressives, liberals of all colors and types are in there. But if you look in there, there are actually quite a lot of buzzer behavior happening in there too. So all sides are being played. Doesn't matter where you think you sit, you're not immune to being shaped by what's happening on social media. And when you look at what those buzzers are saying, you can see them jumping from campaign to campaign, going back for years. And what they're amplifying is not necessarily anyone even knows that they are the target of this amplification. But they amplify voices on the progressive left side that are more strident. And what they do is they set up and they push us to the edges and to the extremes, and our debates and our rhetoric get more and more extreme. And so the end result of all this covert influence is polarization. So it's not, as cynical politicians and populists and these grifters think it's an innocent sport, we are all victims of that, and the end result is our society kind of splits apart. One of my favorite concepts is the euphemism treadmill, this idea that there's a word, people get upset with the word, they don't like the word, they come up with a new word to replace the old word. Other people come along, get upset with this word, and they come up with a new word to replace the old word, and it just repeats. Load shedding, rolling blackouts, load shedding, what's the next term we're going to use, And I think there's an analogy to that in terms of how messaging works in this COVID influence world, how these grifters and populists use words and concepts to sell us those easy answers to complex questions. And we refer to it as the populist treadmill. For example, border integrity, border control, it's an issue. Every country needs to have control of its borders. Populists come along and they start shaving off the edges of that complex issue, and they make it about illegal immigration. They shave a bit more off, and it becomes a case of othering, the foreigners, us versus them. And eventually we end up with xenophobic movements like Put South Africans First and Operation Dudula, and the politicians who support them. Another example, crime affects everyone in South Africa. A lot of South Africans live in rural areas, and rural safety is a real concern. Some people take up that issue, and it starts to get politicized and racialized. And others come along and they take that complex issue and collapse it down, and they serve it up as a rhetoric piece for their own constituencies known as white genocide. And there are many of these issues, these wedge issues, that get used on social media and get overly simplified time and time again. Attacks on the judiciary, the legacy media that's filled this room. These are all issues that on left, right, up, down, middle, center, diagonal, we are being bombarded by on all sides. And you can kind of spot when it's happening to you, when someone takes a complex issue and shaves off that complexity. So just to sum it up, how do you navigate this space? Well, the way that I do it is I try to remember what my principles are. My principles are a free, open, democratic society where I recognize everyone's common humanity. And so I always look for the times when that's being violated. And I have to take a step back and ask myself, is this a real thing or am I being manipulated? If someone says to you, I will give you certainty, I will help you make sense of the world, but you just have to give up one little freedom, that's probably a warning sign that you are being played online. The most obvious example of that at the moment is one of the biggest narrative drives currently on the African continent is the supposed success of Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso after the coup that brought him into power in Burkina Faso. Floyd Chivambo thinks that we need a coup here. Dudazile Sambudla Zuma, big fan. And don't get me wrong, Ibrahim Traoré is a charismatic guy, and he's done some great stuff. He's given a lot of people dignity back. Well, so I'm told on social media. He's given a lot of people dignity back. He's returned African agency and all these kind of things. There's just one problem. You just have to ignore the fact there was no peaceful democratic transfer of power, which means you have to give up just one little freedom. And I'm sure that's the only one they'll take. So, yeah, you know, what I want to say on that was, Bobby Wine from Uganda, I think he put it nicely when, to paraphrase him, he said, if Ibrahim Traoré is such a man of the people, and by all indications he is, then he could set elections tomorrow and win, so why hasn't he? And then we're back and leave it even ground again. No one has to give up any freedoms. If someone's going to scapegoat a certain group and tell you that it's us versus them, well, I'll get to us versus them, but if someone's going to scapegoat a certain group and other them, all Zimbabweans stole your job, or Zimbabweans stole your job, all Mozambicans are criminals, Nigerians are setting up parallel governmental structures in our city, dog whistles like that, then chances are that they are trading on some kind of populist rhetoric, and that is the kind of messaging you're going to find in these kind of networks. If someone says to you that it's better to dismantle an institution than to try and improve it, it may have been true if you were talking about apartheid, but the institutions that we have now were really, really hard won. And if someone says to you the only thing we can do is create a Fanonian apocalypse and wipe the slate clean and start again and rebuild everything that was hard won, fought for, and took decades to build, well, I'm going to think very carefully about that. And as I mentioned earlier, if someone gives you a false binary, us versus them, someone says to you, you need to stop reminding yourself or recognizing our common humanity, that everyone just cares about their kids going to school and being fed, and that at the end of the day, we're all humans with the same issues. They're feeding you an easy answer to a complex problem. And finally, when the shit hits the fan, when the rubber hits the road, if someone says to you, all you need to do is give us a few emergency powers, I'll give them back, I promise. They never, ever do. And those are the kind of messages that you're going to find in being promoted in these swarms. We see them across Africa, we see them across the African continent, we see them across Europe, we see them in America. It's the same playbook over and over again. So, as I said to you in the beginning, there's three things I want to impart upon you. The one is that it's a hive of information manipulation out there, and all sides are being played. If you think you're not subject to it, you're naive. That the product that they're selling you is easy answers to complex questions, and you've got to keep those complex questions in mind by remembering what are your core principles if you want to avoid falling prey to it. And thirdly, we're just people. People are people, and we have limitations to what we're capable of. We're not the ones to blame for spreading fake news and false information. The ones to blame are the grifters and the populists who impose it upon us. And we should be angry about them for doing that. And not look at ourselves and say, what have we done wrong? Obviously, we have to be aware of what we're doing, and we have to be cognizant of it. But that's where we need to put our efforts. So thank you.